Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Care Manager and Provider Information Sessions. This is Amanda Harper. I'm the Assistant Statewide Care Manager Coordinator. Just a couple of quick items. I want to remind everyone that the previous sessions that have been recorded are all available at the link you see at the bottom of this slide on our OPWDD webpage. Our last session from April 10th, the Employment Services and Life Planning Process, recording and PowerPoint are now available on the website. This session, again, is session 5, is the Self-Directed Services, Development of the Life Plan and Staff Action Plans. We have Chad Colarusso with us here today to present on this topic and answer questions as time allows. And our next session on May 8th is going to be a demonstration, and this is high demand, especially from our provider community, to really see what the IAM tool is and to see what some of the questions are from this assessment tool and how they translate into the draft life plan, and then that information is manipulated within the life plan with the care planning team. So this is a demonstration that we'll be doing with one of the CCOs, and I think will be very valuable. So that registration will soon be available and shared through the advisory, and you can also at this link keep going back to that page if you're curious to see if the registration is available. And the recording from today's session within a week will also be posted to the site with the PowerPoint materials and the recording. So for those of you that would like the materials that are being shared today, they will be made available on the website within a few days from this presentation. We just want to note that due to the intensity of the material that's going to be covered to support with this transition, we really ask that you listen, that a lot of your questions are going to be answered by the presentation that Chad has given today. We will allow for some questions at the end, and any questions that are not answered by today's presentation, we encourage you to follow up with your CCO leadership to see if those questions have been answered at a leadership level and they could provide some guidance, and if not, we have included information to contact OPWDD for further questions that haven't been answered today. So thank you very much for your time in attending today, and I'm going to turn it over to Chad Colarusso with Self-Direction.
Okay, thank you very much, Amanda. Appreciate being here. The objectives of this presentation are to help attendees learn about OPWDD services that are self-directed with budget authority, and also to help people understand the unique aspects of self-directed services that need to be considered in the development of life plans and staff action plans. For people who have already taken trainings on life plans and staff action plans, you will see some familiar materials. Those are being used here to provide context regarding how the self-direction services fit within life plans and staff action plans, but I want to emphasize that the purpose of this presentation is really to talk about those unique aspects of self-direction. This is not intended as a replacement for comprehensive life plan or staff action plan training, and there are trainings available that are going to be shared in a resource section here for people who do want a more comprehensive training on developing life plans and staff action plans. First off, what is self-direction? The number one myth about self-direction is that it's a comprehensive service, and this has not been the case since the program known as Consolidated Supports and Services, or CSS, was phased out about 5 years ago. It was transitioned to self-direction, and since then, self-direction is delivered as a collection of services, both waiver and state-funded. And it's important to note that each service is unique and follows its own standards, and those standards are the same for the service as if it was not self-directed. Self-direction, it means that a person is exercising authority and choosing the mix of services and supports that work best for them, and organizing how much of those services they want. The person also accepts responsibility for helping to manage the supports and services. And it's very important to know that the level of services and the services themselves are going to vary from person to person. There's not a one-size-fits-all package of self-directed services for all people who self-direct. Rather, it's going to be unique for each person. I'm not going to go into detail about what self-direction is here because we really need the time to talk about how self-direction will fit within the life planning and staff action plan development, but I want to encourage people who do want to learn more about what self-direction is to avail themselves to a guidance document we have on OPWDD's website, which is the Self-Direction Guidance for Providers. It's our most comprehensive document regarding self-direction. I really encourage anyone who is looking for information about self-direction to take a look and read through that document, have it bookmarked. It's a really useful reference guide. So self-directed services in the life plans and staff action plans, again, where self-direction is not its own service, it's those services that are being self-directed must each be listed in the life plan in accordance with the requirements detailed in that services administrative memorandum. One aspect of self-direction entails a person exercising only employer authority. And again, I'm not going to get into the details of the difference between employer and budget authority, but when a person does not have a self-direction budget and they're only exercising some employer authority, the life plan listing will follow the same exact instructions as if the services were not self-directed. The nuance between exercising employer authority versus a traditional method is that there's a memorandum of understanding between the person and the provider agency, noting what the person's staff management responsibilities look like. But from a life plan and staff action plan perspective, the rules are exactly the same as if the services were identical, were traditional. So the remainder of this presentation is going to address specifically just those people who are exercising budget authority, which means they have a self-direction budget. They will all be working with a fiscal intermediary agency who will be billing for services within that budget. And they'll be having a support broker or someone working in a support broker capacity. So when someone exercises budget authority as part of self-directed services, they have a menu of services that could be included in their self-direction budgets. And that menu is displayed here. It includes community habilitation, supported employment, Prevocational Services, Pathways to Employment, Group Day Habilitation, Respite, Support Broker, Fiscal Intermediary. Noting Fiscal Intermediary here is it is a mandatory service for anybody who self-directs with budget authority. The interesting nuance is it does not actually get reflected in the budget, does not count against the person's annual funding amount. It's an administrative support service, but it is required, so that's why we're listing it here. People can also choose live-in caregiver, individual directed goods and services, other than personal services, a housing subsidy, family reimbursed respite, and family support services. Not going to go into detail about what each of these services are. Again, that self-direction guidance for providers is a helpful resource, especially where some of these services are unique to self-direction. That document provides information about each service as well as references to the administrative memoranda or other documents related to those services. Keep in mind, again, when a person self-directs with budget authority, they are not limited to these services and they do not have to receive all of these services. So the person may receive any combination of these other than fiscal intermediary, which again is required. And also, people may receive additional services, things such as environmental modifications, which do not get listed on their self-direction budget, That does not mean they are ineligible for those services. They may still be eligible. It is just a service that's outside of the self-direction budget. There's charts that help detail what services are in and out of the budget. Again, part of that self-direction guidance for providers, so that's attachments A and B, are two charts that are very helpful in determining, whether a service is part of somebody's self-directed budget, or if it's a service the person may receive that's outside of the budget. Critical point I want to emphasize with this presentation is the importance of the relationship between care managers and support brokers. Right now there's about 13,000 people who are self-directing with budget authority. They all either have a paid professional support broker or are working with someone in a support broker capacity. Some people act as their own support brokers or have family or friends act as support brokers in a non-paid capacity. But either way, there will be somebody fulfilling the support broker role. And the support broker role is very important in that it's closely tied to the person-centered planning in developing the budget. Now, it is not a replacement for the care manager's role. The care manager will, for someone who self-directs with budget authority, still uses person-centered planning process to develop the life plan. The support broker also uses the person-centered planning process, but they're looking to develop the self-direction budget, and also they develop staff action plans for any self-hired services that are within a person's self-direction budget. The care manager is very much so a partner to the support broker in developing the self-direction budget and the staff action plans. It's critical they work together. And also the broker, as somebody who's an important part of the person's planning team, is a close partner to the care manager in developing the life plan. Both the care manager and the support broker are critical members of the person's circle of support, and there are required meetings for support brokers and the circle of support. And OPWDD's expectation is that the circle of support meetings, that is the meetings that the support brokers need to ensure happen, overlap. That is, they are the same meetings as the life plan meetings. And again, the alignment is critical. Working together, the more aligned the person-centered planning processes are, the more effective the life plans and staff action plans are going to be for the person. So we're going to start by talking about life plans a little bit, and again, I'm going to kind of breeze through some of the life plan general information, and we're going to use that to build up to the context of and talking about the specific aspects of self-directed services and how they fit in life plans. So just as a reminder, of course, the life plans are all based on the person, part of the person-centered planning. The 5 sections, again, all revolve around the person's wants and needs, and they are the voice of the plan. Self-direction, when somebody chooses to self-direct with budget authority, it's a further exercise of person-centered planning. It gives the person even more control over their OPWDD services. So again, it's not in any way a replacement, but it's think of it as a supplement. It's taking the person-centered planning a step further by continuing to use the life plan process as it exists, but then also developing a self-direction budget and managing services with budget authority. So looking at specifically sections 2 and 3 of the life plan, note one importance that the frequency, quantity, and time frame in these sections are related to implementing the goals, not the actual occurrence of service. Also want to point out that for habilitation services in the self-direction budget, that could be community habilitation, for example, it is critical that there is a provider assigned my goal valued outcome in section 2 or 3 of the life plan. For non-habilitation services in self-direction budget, individual directed goods and services, also known as IDGS, is an example. Fiscal Intermediary, support broker, these are all non-habilitation services. There is not a mandate for those services to have a My Goal valued outcome in sections 2 or 3 of the life plan. Justification in the life plan for those services can be provided through a My Goal valued outcome, but it can also be justified through the narrative section, section 1. Though those, as we'll detail, that does not alleviate the requirement that those services are, in fact, listed in sections 4 or 5, which we're going to really detail in a few minutes. So, with the goals determined in sections 2 or 3, we're calling that's using a person-centered process. The members of the care planning team and the person work together to identify the person's goals and outcomes and the provider-assigned goals and the frequency, quantity, and time frame for those goals to be delivered. Really want to emphasize that for people who self-direct with budget authority, the support broker and the fiscal intermediary are critical members of this care planning team that's working collaboratively to determine how these provider-assigned goals are coming about. Remember that the support broker is very involved in person-centered planning with the person as part of developing their budget, and the fiscal intermediary is going to be the service provider, the OPWDD service provider for many of the services when a person does self-direct with budget authority. So including them in the process is critical. Just to quickly refresh on section 3 of the life plan, the purpose of the section is to outline what the person needs to achieve the goals and valued outcomes. It covers safeguards, supports, and plan with protective oversight. Again, the point we want to emphasize here is the need for alignment and collaboration in terms of working with, for someone who self-directs with budget authority, working with the support brokers who are going to be writing the staff action plans for self-hired community rehabilitation and supported employment, and with the fiscal intermediaries who are going to be the service provider. It's really important that they're at the table. And just to step back in terms of, I keep referencing brokers will be writing the staff action plans for self-hired community rehabilitation, support, and employment, and somebody may say, well, that's just 1 or 2 possible services, and that's one of 3 methodologies they could be delivered by. But for those 13,000 people who are currently self-directing their services, self-hired community rehabilitation is by far the service they are most using in terms of what they're allocating, what they're choosing to allocate their funds for. So, it's a very frequently used service is self-hired community rehabilitation. Many, if not most, of people who have self-directed budgets do utilize that service. So, working with a support broker to develop a staff action plan for self-hired community rehabilitation is very, very common for people who self-direct with budget authority. All right. So moving to section 4 of the life plan and the fields that are required. And what we want to do is take a moment and look at this through the lens of people who are self-directing with budget authority. Of course, the authorized service is listed per the category of service in the service-specific ADM, and I want to emphasize again that the service being listed is the service. It's not self-direction. It's not fiscal intermediary for every self-directed service. Fiscal intermediary is a waiver service that gets listed in section 4, but it does not cover all of the other services in the budget. So for somebody who self-directs with budget authority, who has, say their only service is self-hired community rehabilitation, there needs to be two separate listings, one for fiscal intermediary as a authorized service and another service for community habilitation. Now, the provider for that service where it's self-hired is going to be Fiscal Intermediary. The Fiscal Intermediary always provides the Fiscal Intermediary service as well as self-hired services, and we're going to detail in later slides every service that could be in a budget and take a look at how those are going to appear. But we get a lot of questions on how services in self-direction budgets need to be listed with the service and the provider, and I really want to emphasize again, that's the point where self-direction is not a comprehensive service. It's a way person's chosen services are delivered, so each selected service does need to be listed separately, and for many of them the Fiscal Intermediary is going to be the provider, but as we're going to discuss in a little bit, you'll see that that's not universally the case for every service that's in a budget. Effective dates, this is the same as for any non-self-directed service. So for the initial life plan, the effective dates for each waiver service are the same as the from-to dates of the initial life plan. When there's a life plan in place and services are newly added, the effective date needs to correspond to the life plan review date, or on the date which the service was added, or the life plan amendment occurred. And you know, as a reminder, for newly authorized services that occur after there's a life plan in effect, it's important that there's an effective date on or before the first date of service for which the agency is going to bill. Unit is also a required field. That's the frequency of the service as required within each service-specific ADM. So examples of the units that are required, the frequency, it could be ongoing or time limited or one time. And you know, regarding self-directed, looking at the services, there are waiver services that'll be in Section 4. So a person who's self-directing their respite, their living caregiver, the individual goods and services will all be in Section 4. And for some of the state-paid services, other than personal services, housing subsidy, family reimbursed respite, those are all going to be listed in Section 5. Again, we're going to detail each, and I want to reemphasize the idea that a person with a self-direction budget may have services provided by other agencies apart from their fiscal intermediary, and they could have services provided that are not part of their self-direction budget. They're not limited to that budget in terms of what services they can enroll in. For any service included in a self-direction budget that is not agency supported or direct provider purchased, and that includes support broker, individual goods and services, fiscal intermediary, the total units column should list a 0. And in the comments section, there should be entered the words per approved self-direction budget. Other services that in the self-direction budget might be agency supported or direct provider purchase that'll be indicated in the budget. Those are services that may have a provider that is or is not the fiscal intermediary. For those services, they're going to follow the total units and the total units procedures as would any traditional service. So somebody could direct provider purchase group day habilitation, for example, and the total units listed would be as listed in the service authorization letter or 99999 if not known. Okay, now we're going to jump to the service-specific listings for each of those services that could be included in a self-direction budget. We're going to start with community habilitation because, again, it is such a highly utilized service. Recall that community habilitation, of course, as in its name, is a habilitation service. Therefore, it must have at least one My Goal valued outcome identified in sections 2 or 3. Community habilitation can be, as part of a self-direction budget, can be delivered in 3 different ways. It could be self-hired, agency-supported, or direct provider purchased. From the ADM, there's a specific way the service must appear. Any self-hired community habilitation is always going to have the FI as the provider. If the service is agency-supported or direct provider purchased, it will be the name of the agency. This could be the fiscal intermediary. It does not need to be. A person can direct provider purchase or agency support a service in their budget from a separate agency. So it's important to recognize who the actual agency providing the service is. It's not always automatically the fiscal intermediary just because a person has a self-direction budget. Effective date, again, follows the standard rules. Quantity is the field that may or may not be used. The unit for community habilitation is hour or hourly. Per may or may not be used. Total units, again, that's going to depend on the method of the service. It's going to be 0 if self-hired. If agency-supported or direct provider purchased, it will be per the service authorization letter, or 99999 if unknown. Duration is always going to be ongoing, and if it is a self-hired service, the comments need to include the per approved self-direction budget language. Supported employment is also a habilitation service, very much like community habilitation. It can be self-hired, agency-supported, or direct provider purchased. It should be listed as SEMP for the authorized service. And again, like community habilitation, any self-hired SEMP has the FI as the provider, and any agency-supported or direct provider purchase will have the actual name of the agency, may or may not be the fiscal intermediary. The units are hour or hourly. Again, like community habilitation, total units are always going to be 0 if self-hired, with the comment of per approved self-direction budget. And the units will be per the letter, or the 9s if unknown, and duration is always going to be ongoing as authorized. Prevocational services are another habilitation service. So like supported employment and ComHab, they must have at least one My Goal valued outcome identified. Prevocational services, depending on the person's self-direction budget type, can be included and budgeted for within their self-direction budget, but they can only be direct provider purchased. So you don't have to think of any self-hire aspects for prevocational services. The authorized service is going to be either site-based prevocational services, if it's site-based, or community-based prevocational services. If it's community-based, it will be the name of the agency providing the service. Again, this could be the same agency as the person's fiscal intermediary, but it might not be. There's a good chance a person could purchase this service from another agency and include it in their budget. The unit for prevocational services is a day if it's site-based. If it's community-based, it's going to be hour or hourly. And the total units will follow the traditional service, so it's going to be per the letter, or the 9s if unknown. And in comments, it needs to be a duration listed as ongoing as authorized. Pathways to employment follows some of the general principles of prevocational services, also a habilitation service with at least one goal valued outcome identified. Also, like prevocational service, it can only be direct provider purchased within a self-direction budget. The service must be listed as pathway to employment. The provider is whoever the actual agency providing it is. The unit is hour or hourly. And in the comments, the duration needs to be listed as time limited, 12 months, or 278 hours, whichever comes first. If an extension for pathways is granted, that should be noted in the comments section as well. Group day habilitation is another habilitation service that must have a goal or valued outcome identified in section 2 or 3. Like pathways and in prevocational services, it can only be direct provider purchased. The name of the service is day habilitation. Provider is always going to be the actual agency. The unit is a day, and in comments, the duration needs to be listed as ongoing. Respite is not a habilitation service. Therefore, support for respite in the life plan can be provided either through a goal valued outcomes in section 2 or 3, or by needs described in the narrative section. Like community habilitation and supported employment, it can be delivered as a self-hired service, an agency-supported service, or a direct provider purchase service. The authorized service is always going to be listed as respite. If it's self-hired, the fiscal intermediary will always be the provider. If it's agency-supported or direct provider purchased, it might be the fiscal intermediary or it might be the provider. Again, the actual provider needs to be listed. There are some distinctions with the respite billing standards in terms of how these are listed. Specifically, if it's a self-hired service, the unit per the applicable ADM is an hour. And if it's agency-supported or direct provider purchased, it's hour or hourly. Again, if it's self-hired, the total units will be 0. And the comment per approved self-direction budget needs to be listed for any self-hired service. Regardless of the methodology, respite has a duration listed as ongoing. Support broker, if a person has a paid support broker, it does need to be listed. Recall that a person might not have a paid support broker. If a person has a support broker as a natural support, that could be listed elsewhere, but where most people have paid support brokers, it's important that those are listed in section 4 as a waiver service. Again, it's not a habilitation service, so support can be through either the goals or valued outcomes in sections 2 or 3 or described in the narrative. The service can be listed as support brokerage or support broker. And the provider for support brokerage is always going to be the fiscal intermediary agency. The unit is hourly, and total units is always going to be 0, and duration is always going to be ongoing with the additional note of per approved self-direction budget. Fiscal intermediary will be listed as a service in section 4 for anybody who's self-directing with budget authority. It's listed at, again, not a habilitation service, so it can be supported through a valid outcome goal in section 2 or 3, or described by, or by needs described in the narrative. The authorized service is fiscal intermediary. The provider is the name of the fiscal intermediary agency. The unit is monthly. The total units is always going to be 0, with the comments for duration being ongoing and per approved self-direction budget. Live-in caregiver is another service available to people who self-direct. Again, it's not a habilitation service, so it can be supported either by needs in the narrative or by valued outcomes goals in section 2 or 3. It needs to be listed as live-in caregiver for the service. The fiscal intermediary will always be the provider agency for the live-in caregiver service. The unit will always be monthly. The total units will be 0. And in comments, the duration will be ongoing, and per approved self-direction budget needs to be listed as well. Individual directed goods and services. is another service that's unique for people who self-direct with budget authority. Again, not a habilitation service, so it can be supported by desired outcomes goals in section 2 or 3, or it could also be supported by needs in the narrative section. It must be listed in section 4 as individual directed goods and services. The Fiscal Intermediary agency will always be the provider for individual directed goods and services, also known as IDGS. The unit for IDGS is day, and total units will always be listed as 0, with comments for per approved self-direction budget and the duration as ongoing. Other than personal services moves us into the state paid services that are available to people who self-direct with budget authority. Likewise, these state paid services, not habilitation services, so they can be supported in the life plan in sections 2 or 3 or by needs described in section 1. Other than personal services should be listed in section 5. The name of the provider, of the agency providing the fiscal intermediary service goes under name. The role should be the name of the service, which is other than personal service. And for address and phone, you'll use the address and phone for the fiscal intermediary agency. Housing subsidy, very similar to other than personal services. Also not a habilitation service, so you have the option of having it justified through sections 2 or 3 or by section 1 with needs described. Likewise, the name is going to be fiscal intermediary service. The role is housing subsidy. And family reimbursed respite, very similar to other than personal services and housing subsidy, not a habilitation service, listed in section 5 with the role for family reimbursed respite, the other information related to the fiscal intermediary agency. Family support services or assistive supports. This is a unique state paid service in that, unlike the other 3, it is not necessarily provided by the fiscal intermediary. It does need to be reflected in people's self-direction budgets when they receive it. It's more like a direct provider purchased state paid service. So the name needs to be the agency providing the service, may or may not be the fiscal intermediary. The service will depend on whether it's family support services or assistive supports, and the address and phone number are going to link back to the agency who's actually providing the service. So we're running pretty tight on time. So I'm going to go through some of the staff action plan general concepts pretty quickly. In general, staff action plans are the detail of what the habilitation staff will do to help people achieve the goals defined in their life plans. It's going to also describe how the individual safeguards and needs in the life plan will be met. And they are required for all habilitation services, including those that are self-directed, whether they're self-hired, agency-supported, or direct provider purchased. And the billing and program requirements for staff action plans will be found in ADM 2018-09. Very important. Everybody's very familiar with that. And they are linked to the habilitation, my goal, valued outcome, and the provider assigned goals or supports as they are stated in the life plan. We do want to emphasize that the my goal, valued outcome, and the provider assigned goals and supports in the life plan should appear exactly the same in the staff action plan. The staff action plan then takes those elements and builds on them to add more detail. They can clarify the meaning and intent of the provider assigned goals or supports, but they should reflect them directly. Where the connection points are, the section 4 will list the habilitation of the life plan, will list the habilitation service that then needs to have a staff action plan. where that service is reflected in Section 2 through outcome and support strategies, the My Goals, and the provider-assigned habilitation goals and staff actions as assigned. Again, those need to appear identically in the staff action plan. Likewise, Section 3, the individual safeguards, the goal valued outcome listed in Section 3, and the provider-assigned habilitation goals need to be listed in the staff action plans, and then, of course, the staff action plans build on those. So this is older material. I'm going to kind of breeze through talking about the difference between the My Goal Valued Outcome, the provider assigned goal. Again, it's really about perspective. My Goal Valued Outcome is the person's identified goals. What do they want to do? Whereas provider assigned goal or support helps specify what the provider is expected to do in relation to the person's goal valued outcome. Where the staff action plan includes goals, supports, and tasks from the life plan, call that a goal, is what the person wants to do. The support is the assistance given to the person to help them maintain. It's what the provider will provide as a service. And the task is defined as something that's one thing to be done, a one-time element. Going back for any habilitation service providers on this, what's important to keep in mind here is where items listed as a goal or support may be derived into those requirements, such as where community habilitation must have a service linked to a goal or support as identified in the staff action plan, and as part of the billing duration. Those things are billable as listed in the staff action plan. A task does not meet the definition of habilitation and would not on its own be something that would meet that requirement that at least one goal or support as identified in the staff action plan was part of the service duration. Just talking about the evolution of taking the life plan starts with the sequential POMS goal. Person may want to have the best possible health. Their goal valued outcome may be, I want to lose weight so I can feel better. That translates to a goal assigned to the provider of the provider assigned goal to provide an exercise program. And then as staff action plans are developed, you're going to take that provider assigned goal of provide an exercise program and build on that with the staff action of my community habilitation staff will work with me to help choose what kind of exit program I'm interested in and engage in this exercise program. Talking about the sections required, there's three specific sections required, again, detailed in that staff action plan administrative memorandum. I'm not going to go into detail here because the requirements are really specified there, but keep in mind every staff action plan must include identifying information, the individual habilitation goals, valued outcome, and provider assigned goals, as well as a third section for the person's safeguards. Within the skill acquisition section, we're talking about supports the staff will provide to assist a person be more independent. With skill retention, we're talking about how to advance or retain a person's skills. With staff supports, you're talking about the actions provided by the habilitation staff where a person is not expected to independently perform the task. And those are going to be designated as a support or with an S. A person could also have exploration of new experiences in their staff action plan. That is an acceptable component, and just going to keep going because we're running short on time. And Section 3 is talking about the individual safeguards from Section 3 of the Life Plan. Again, it's a compilation of all the supports needed for the person to remain safe. They're person-focused, not based around the program's needs or requirement. They define the overarching need areas for the person. And they need to be updated in real time for use across the service providers. That's that feedback loop that starts with the person and goes through the life plan and the staff action plan process, and making sure as a person's needs change, there's communication to identify what those changing needs are so they can be addressed. As far as staff action plans for services in a self-direction budget, there's 5 services that could be in self-direction budgets that are habilitation services: community habilitation, supported employment, prevocational services, pathways to employment, and group stay habilitation. The same rules and requirements for staff action plans apply to all habilitation services, whether or not they're self-directed. Community habilitation and supported employment may be direct provider purchase, like a traditional service. They could be agency supported, which means there's employer authority and they have that MOU between the provider and the person, or they may be self-hired, which is where the person's exercising the most authority and doing things like setting the wage for the staff. But again, regardless of the methodology, the rules and requirements for staff action plans will apply for the specific service. So staff action plans are always created, developed, and implemented by habilitation providers. A unique element for self-direction with budget authority is that responsibility for those services when they are self-hired, that's community rehabilitation or supported employment when it's self-hired, which is very commonly used services, the responsibility for developing the staff action plans is explicitly that of the support broker. Now, that does not take away from the fact that the habilitation provider, which would be the fiscal intermediary for those agencies, are responsible for the habilitation, for the staff action plans, but the person in the role of doing that is going to always specifically be the support broker. They're acting as an agent of the habilitation provider, that is the fiscal intermediary, and one of their essential tasks is developing these staff action plans for those self-hired services. So just want to emphasize again, that's where the partnership is critical. Successful implementation of staff action plan lies in the strengths of the partnerships of all involved. And support brokers are integral in helping people surround themselves with those who believe in their vision, their goals, and who can help them plan and strategize to meet their valued outcomes. Other than developing a self-direction budget and executing amendments to that budget, the other critical role for support brokers on top of the budget and creating the staff action plans is helping the person develop and maintain a circle of support. So again, they're a really important role in the person-centered planning element. I can't emphasize enough the importance of keeping them involved and at the table, recognizing that as life plans with habilitation services, where those are self-hired, are being developed, it's important that there's communication with the support broker, that they're at the table, that they're able to successfully develop a staff action plan that does align with the life plan, and ultimately that both plans are led and guided by the voice of the person who's receiving the services. So that concludes kind of the self-direction specific aspects of life plan and staff action plan. I really want to, go back and reemphasize that, the purpose of this session was just to talk about those aspects. There are some excellent resources out there that cover more comprehensively life plan and staff action plan. specifically those that were listed in the advisory number 6 of 2019, and that can be accessed via this slide. There's additional resources available, including some of these that are for self-directed services like Fiscal Intermediary Services and support brokerage. And we do have an email box that people can reach out to if they have questions specific to self-direction. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to mute for a moment to review the questions that have come in and to answer a few as time allows. I'd also like to note that we do keep track of the information that people are seeking to allow that to inform future sessions. So if your question isn't answered today, again, Chad's provided a contact to the self-direction mailbox, as well as reaching out to your own CCO leadership for guidance regarding things specific to your CCO or if you're with a provider agency, your provider agency leadership. So we will be right back. Hi, everybody. Okay, so we'll, as I said, answer a few questions now. So, Chad, what happens to the relationship if a broker, in a meeting, if a broker is not present? Does the FI then hold the meetings and replace the broker's responsibilities?
So, you know, again, where where a person has a support broker service, they must be conducting the minimum required amount of meetings. So there would not be an expectation of circle of support meetings happen without the support broker there. There might be other meetings in terms of you know, planning team meetings that need to occur, but the expectation is that the broker is always there, that they're not being replaced by the fiscal intermediary. Where a person does not have a support broker in a paid capacity, they would still have somebody acting in that support broker role to fulfill that. So, in cases where somebody's support broker, resigns or is otherwise, not providing that service anymore, the idea is that somebody else is identified as fulfilling the support broker role, whether that's somebody from the fiscal intermediary agency or not, could depend on the situation, but they would always be identified as the support broker.
Great, thank you. Is the care manager required to attend the COS meeting? So
that's a good question. We really emphasize from the support broker service angle that the importance of, again, that partnership, that collaboration between the support broker and the care manager. When you look at the bare minimum billing standard to be able to substantiate the billing for the support broker service, a circle of support meeting can occur without the care manager present and still meet the bare minimum requirement. However, we very much so train support brokers and really emphasize the importance of that. And we say, from a quality perspective, it's important that care managers are at a minimum invited, preferably attending as a critical member of the team. It's permissible for care managers to attend via phone or video conference. There's not a requirement that they're attending in person, and they should always at least be invited. But if it comes down to, can the services be billed for, there's not a mandate that the care manager is present. Great,
thank you. What if the FI is the same agency for self-hire staff and direct provider purchase? So, how is that differentiated in life?
So that's a good question. The best way to differentiate that would be with, and we'd have to work on this and see how it works in the system. I would think that 2 listings would be the ideal way if that's possible in the system, but we're going to have to research that and get back on it, because where that could be distinguished would be within the unit's authorization becomes the unique element.
Great, thank you. We've also had several questions that have come in about the new technology that the CCOs are using for the comprehensive assessment known as the IAM, and how it feeds into the life plan and that draft life plan that's reviewed at the care planning meeting of adjustments that can be made. So there is, I do want to note that we're going to have a document coming out soon, a question and answers document that will speak to this that you can reference in writing, but the short answer for now is that there really needs to be a collaborative effort at that care planning meeting to review the information and make sure that everybody is in agreement that the goals that are being assigned are appropriate, that they make sense, that there's a reasonable amount of them, that there can be adjustments made to that information that exists within the life plan, that the care managers do have the ability to edit that, and that the care planning team really needs to work together to review and agree to that information that is in the life plan. So as I said, that there is going to be documentation that will further describe this process and how to address issues that arise through the life planning process if providers are receiving things that they feel are misrepresented or inaccurate. And there is another question regarding the safeguard section. Should there be a specific frequency, or does as needed suffice? So I just want to reiterate that in section 2 and 3 of the life plan, the frequency, quantity, and time frame related to how many times in a given time frame the goal or safeguards should be worked on. There are drop downs that allow for that's not specified, that as needed or ongoing are options within those drop downs and are options for those safeguards. That brings us to time, so we are going to need to end for today. As I said, we will be keeping the rest of the questions that have been asked to guide future presentations, and ask that you please reach out with further questions that you have. Thank you very much for attending today. Have a good afternoon.